Good afternoon. This is Katie Friedman from Unitrends. I'd like to welcome you to our live session today. We will be covering how cloud fits into your backup and recovery plans. Before we begin today, I did want to give you a couple of housekeeping notes. As many of you may have already noticed, we do have all attendees in listen-only mode. With that in mind, we do welcome your questions throughout today's presentation. However, we do ask that you utilize the Q&A functionality, which you will find by selecting the icon with a question mark from the upper right-hand corner of your screen if you have that view, or from the drop-down menu near the middle top of your screen if you have that view. Please make sure to address all questions to all panelists so that we can answer your questions as quickly as possible. With those details taken care of, I did want to go ahead and introduce our presenters today. Today we have Dave LeClaire. Dave?
Thanks, Katie. So let's jump right into today's topic, which we could alternately have titled, how cloud can actually protect your business and keep your business up and running no matter what life throws at you. What we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about some of the different cloud backup and recovery options that are available today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the advantages and disadvantages of using cloud. And we're going to finish up by looking at some of the top considerations for building a cloud-enabled DR plan and how Unitrends can actually help you with that. So I usually start off talking about cloud, and a lot of people start to kind of roll their eyes, not another cloud talk. But truthfully, cloud is something that businesses have been turning to increasingly over the past several years as a way to accelerate innovation, accelerate the way we can do projects faster than ever before, and hopefully get some competitive differentiation. And because our businesses are demanding more and more out of their IT functions, cloud is a way that we're able to deliver on that. And that's really very, very true for backup and recovery and continuity solutions. There's been a lot of innovation that has gone on in the space that allows you to protect your data, protect your applications, protect your business in ways that were not possible just a few years ago. Particularly if you're a customer who is using some of the traditional backup methods of backing up your data to tape and sending those tapes off-site. It's a very manual process. It's very error-prone. Frequently, those tapes come back and they don't recover well. Even if you've moved to a more modern virtualized backup solution or physical backup appliance where you're doing disk-to-disk, it's still not as empowered and as easy to use as actually having a system that is both local and cloud-based. So there are some things that we can do to address some of the traditional backup problems. Cloud can also help us with some of the struggles that we actually have in making sure that our DR environments are up and running and in a configuration that we know is going to be recoverable. A lot of the struggles that companies have with DR revolve around the fact that testing those environments can be very time-consuming. It can take thousands of dollars per test. It's very disruptive to the enterprise to actually test DR. And as a result, those tests are done very infrequently. Given some of the new capabilities in cloud and with recovery assurance capabilities, we now have solutions that can ease this burden and actually have an environment that not only is set up for disaster recovery and continuity, but is tested frequently and in a way that doesn't put a burden on IT so that we can know with 100% confidence that our environment is going to function properly when we have that moment of recovery in the event of a downtime event or a disaster. So cloud-empowered backup and DR certainly can be the answer for many of these challenges. So we wanted to walk through some of the different options that are out there when we look at cloud recovery. And truthfully, I'm going to talk through a number of different options. And as a Unitrends representative, I can honestly say that I really don't have a horse in this race. Unitrends has a very broad portfolio of cloud recovery options, such that whether you're interested in private cloud or a public hyperscale cloud or an integrated cloud, we really have options across all those. So I'm going to talk about all of them. I am going to use some of the Unitrends products as examples of those types of options that are out there. But you're going to see that the right option for your business is going to depend on what your needs are. So typically, we want to start with what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish with a cloud recovery solution? Are you simply just looking to do backup? You want to be able to recover from when a server goes down or somebody deletes a file. Or are you looking for something that is a regulatory need for long-term retention for compliance reasons? Different solutions are going to give different results in terms of cost, in terms of recoverability, and in terms of the RPO and RTO that you're going to get. So you really want to know kind of what are you trying to accomplish? Are we trying to just do data protection, or are we trying to do protection of an entire site or full application protection of critical applications? That potentially leads us to different options as well. Many businesses have a requirement to, whether it's by policy or regulatory issue, or maybe even just a preference as to where their data can be located. And that actually leads us to a whole other set of questions of whether we want to have backup data that is local only. Is it going to be local and cloud? Is it going to be cloud only that we're looking for? Do we need it to be only within our own environment? So a private cloud solution that is completely within our own firewalls. Is that the solution we're looking for? Or are we looking for something that is going to be playing into a hyperscale cloud plan that we actually have with Amazon or Azure or Google? Or am I looking for something that is going to be a completely integrated solution that includes not only the local backup and recovery and archiving capabilities, but also the cloud component of that? There are different options for all of these. Understanding what your recovery SLAs for recovery time objective and recovery point objectives are also going to be very important as we make these decisions. There are trade-offs in all of these solutions. A solution that is right for company A might not be right for company B. And a lot of it comes down to what are we looking to spend on the solution, and what are we looking for RTO and RPO goals. You can actually find some very inexpensive solutions out there, but when it comes time to actually recover, you may find that transferring a lot of data that all has to go over a WAN connection is going to take potentially days to recover back, which is very different than some of the other options that are out there that may include DRAS or the ability to ship data overnight through physical media that can give you a much lower recovery time. So let's look at some of the examples, and we're going to walk through private, public, cloud, integrated cloud, hyperscale clouds, and some various options that we actually have out there. So kind of the private cloud option is really something that has been popular for a number of years. This situation is pretty simple. You simply have two different sites or more, and we're going to essentially use the second site as a replication target to protect ourselves from a disaster. So in this case, data from site 1 is copies of those backups are moved over to site 2. We may actually decide to actually replicate across sites. So site 1 is protecting site 2, and site 2 is protecting site 1. And we're basically configured like this so that if we do have a disaster at site 1, we can very quickly use the other site, the backup data that's been there, to quickly spin up servers at that second site, whether they're physical servers or virtual servers, and be back in business within just a few minutes of downtime. This has been a popular option for a number of years, particularly for larger companies that have multiple sites and can afford to build up duplicate environments. But frequently what we're seeing is more and more customers looking at a public cloud option, whether it is an integrated public cloud that is purpose-built from the backup vendor like Unitrends that's incorporated in, or something that actually is designed to work with a hyperscale provider. So we're going to look next at kind of the integrated purpose-built public cloud. So Unitrends has two public cloud options that are part of our Unitrends cloud that we offer. The first is called No Limits Cloud. No Limits Cloud is designed to essentially be DR for your backups or backups for your backups. So anything that's actually backed up to your local appliance, your local backup appliance inside your enterprise on your premise is going to be moved up into the cloud. So you're going to have the exact same set of backup copies in the cloud, the exact same set of retention in the cloud as you do as on your on-premise appliance. More and more customers, though, are moving towards our second option, which is called Forever Cloud. And Forever Cloud was designed specifically for customers that need long-term retention of data. And what we do with Forever Cloud is we take sets of copies of backups and we move them to the Unitrends cloud. And we store a set of backups. So we store at least 7 daily backups. And at the end of that seven days, we roll that up into a weekly backup, and we store 4 of those weekly backups. So using a GFS, a grandfather, father, son kind of hierarchy, we will store 7 dailies, 4 weeklies, 12 monthlies, and then an infinite number of yearly backups. So if you have a requirement to keep 15 years or 20 years of data on hand, you can do that very cost effectively with the Unitrends Forever Cloud option. One of the challenges we see in moving data to the cloud is that if you don't have a fat pipe, it can take a long time to actually move that data to the cloud. And even if you do have a fairly high-speed connection, if you have terabytes and terabytes of data, it can take a long time to do that. So we actually have an offer as part of our Unitrends cloud called Rapid Seed, which allows us to use physical media to create the initial set of data in the cloud. So if you have 30 terabytes of data, sending it over the WAN could take potentially weeks, depending on how big of a connection you have. So in that case, what we do is we actually ship you physical media. You load your data actually onto those disks. You overnight them back. Our cloud ops team loads that data into the Unitrends cloud, and your initial data set is now populated into the cloud. From that point on, we are basically doing incremental backups of only change data from your local appliance into the cloud. And once we actually have your data in the cloud, we can augment and do all sorts of other things for disaster recovery. We can use that data to do disaster recovery as a service. The other thing we can do is just like we seeded your data in, if you actually have a disaster at your site, Unitrends could actually use the backup copies that you actually have in your data center to essentially load up an appliance and then overnight that back. So again, if you have terabytes and terabytes of data, we can get you back up and running in 1 day, where if you had to send that all over the internet connection, that could potentially take weeks. It's the difference between kind of having a very short and known recovery time objective versus having one that's going to get very extended out. So as I said, once we have your backup copies in our cloud, we can perform disaster recovery as a service using that data. So if you actually have a disaster and your local facility is damaged, using the data that is stored in the Unitrends cloud, we can use that data and spin up we can spin up cloud-based versions of your VMware VMs or Hyper-V VMs or your physical Windows systems or other systems that are critical to your operation and get you back up and running within the Unitrends cloud using our compute capabilities in the Unitrends cloud to make sure that you're back up and running as quickly as possible. For those customers that want that extra assurance that your DR is absolutely working properly, we can also use our reliable DR product to automate the testing and reporting of your DR environment in the Unitrends cloud. So what we do there is we actually, in the Unitrends cloud, create a test kind of sandbox where your backup data is then loaded into machines that are then validated at the application level to make sure that they're actually performing exactly as you would expect them to be, that you're meeting your RPO and RTOs in actuality. So you don't have to guess that your environment is recoverable. You know for an absolute fact that it is recoverable, it's been certified, and we'll ship an automated report back to you, basically attesting to that fact. So that's the kind of the Unitrends cloud offer. We also have an offer that is suitable for customers who want to be using one of the major hyperscale clouds for backup and recovery, whether that's AWS or Google or Rackspace or whoever. We have a couple options for that. Unitrends backup appliances have a feature called Cloud Hook that allows us to replicate backup copies from the local appliance into those hyperscale environments. So move your data into AWS S3 or Google Cloud. But another option that we actually have, which is can be used not only for just migrating and getting your data into the cloud, can be used for a complete disaster recovery or cloud bursting situation, is our product that we call Boomerang. And Boomerang is designed to move your applications between a VMware environment and AWS and back. And we take care of all the work that is necessary to basically do that. So we take data that's running in VMs, we replicate that into the AWS environment, so your data is stored in S3. But we also convert and map your VMDK snapshots and all that data and all that configuration into native Amazon CloudFormation machines, so that you're able to use that data and spin them up. If you need to actually declare a disaster, you can actually use the EC2 resources in Amazon to actually do DR. It's a very powerful solution that doesn't require any local appliance. Boomerang can work with Unitrends appliances, or it can run standalone if you just want to have a cloud-only solution as well. So there's a lot of different options out there, depending on what your needs actually are. What we sometimes hear, though, is, well, that's great, but doesn't cloud introduce a new set of concerns? And yes, for some cloud solutions, there are some concerns. If you don't have seeding, you can have some concerns around WAN. If SLAs are not defined, there can be other concerns. But there are solutions out there that answer all the different sets of concerns. So, but it pays to shop around and kind of understand how the different solutions actually work in these areas. So some of the things you want to consider when you're looking at a cloud-based or cloud-empowered backup and recovery solution is what we have shown here on the screen. What's the impact it's going to have on your planning and deployment? In some cases, it can increase the complexity. In other cases, it can make things simpler. Not all cloud solutions are costs the same. Some of them charge fees that can be quite surprising if you're not used to using cloud services. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a minute, where others are pretty straightforward. Your cloud SLAs, you really need to read the fine print of the SLA to understand what the recoverable objectives are, what the availability, uptime of that cloud is going to be, and what's the implication if they fail to meet the guarantees that they put out there. So it really pays to kind of read the fine print in your SLAs. We talked a little about WAN transfer rates with seeding, but this is really a major consideration, particularly if you're in a part of the world where you're not able to get a very big transfer rate between your local environment and the cloud. This is another one we're going to dive a little bit deeper into. Some other things to consider, particularly if you're an international business or have concerns about where your data might be located. There's a lot going on in the space around data sovereignty. Understanding kind of where your data is located. Is it going to be moving jurisdictions? You know, if you're a Canadian company, is your data being stored in the United States? And if so, you know, what's the implication of that? Of course, and then of course we have the usual cloud concerns that people often ask about: security, you know, the level of services. Is there a human being that's actually going to be there to help you? And then what's sometimes known as the cloud trap. You know, once I get my data into the cloud, how easy is it for me to get my data out and move it to another vendor? These are all considerations that you have to look at as you're looking at cloud solutions. Security is an interesting one because it's probably the top concern that we hear from people when we talk about clouds. But the reality is when you look at most cloud providers, their security is probably superior to what most enterprises have within their own data center. They have things like biometric locks and 24/7 full-time security guards and really robust electronic and firewall security. And they're going through audits regularly. Unitrends Cloud, for example, we will happily deliver you a report that goes through all the different security things that we go through and basically deliver you that SSA 16 certification of what we do. But some of the other ones, let's dive a little bit deeper into a couple of these. I'm not going to go into all those considerations, kind of in the interest of time, but I do want to touch on a couple of them. The first is cost. If you look at examples of different cloud backup costs, they vary pretty widely. If you look at, for example, Unitrends with our Forever or No Limits Cloud, you know, we provide a lot of services with our cloud beyond just cloud storage. We provide that physical seeding and that data shipment SLA so you can get your data back overnight. We provide what we call white glove service, so you can call us 24/7, 365 days a year, and there's going to be somebody there to basically help you with your recovery from our cloud at any one point in time. We have the ability to do DR and recovery assurance. Our price per gigabyte is 10 cents a gigabyte per month. If you can compare that to Amazon and Google, who are, if you look at their cold storage options, Amazon has Glacier, Google has Google Nearline. Those are at 1 cent per gigabyte or less. Glacier's most recent price move, I think, moves it down to 0.7 cents a gigabyte. But they also have other fees. They charge fees for network egress rates. So every time you want to pull your data out of the network or out of the cloud or move it among the different cloud geographies, they're going to charge you a rate per gigabyte. And those fees can really start to add up. They also potentially charge you a fee every time you want to access and retrieve your data for backup. So there's other costs. So when we actually look at and talk with people, they still kind of come back and say, well, wow, but you know, 1 cent, that's really cheap. And for some customers, this is going to be the right solution. You know, isn't that kind of a no-brainer? If you can get 1 cent or less per gigabyte, how can you possibly compete with that at 10 cents? And it really comes down to, well, what are you paying for? In some of the cloud offers, you're actually paying for the amount of storage that you're going to consume. Unitrends actually doesn't, even though we're 10 cents a gigabyte, we're not actually charging you for the cloud storage. We're charging you for the amount of data you're protecting. So this is an important distinction because your cloud storage can really add up over time. So let's say, for example, you have, just for example's sake, you have 10 virtual machines with 100 gigabytes each. So you have 1 terabyte of data that you want to protect. Unitrends only charges you for that 1 terabyte of protected data. Even though over time, we're going to store many, many copies of your backups in the cloud. And the reality is that the cloud storage consumed is probably going to be significantly higher than that 1 terabyte. It's probably over the course of a year or two grow to 15 or 20 terabytes of storage. With the other solutions, you're going to be paying for all that storage. So that 1 cent per gigabyte is going to start adding up. With Unitrends, you have some cost surety, and you're only paying for that protected data. We actually have a blog. We actually have a cost calculator that actually goes through and makes some of these comparisons to help you make some decisions. So if you're interested in kind of comparing the different costs of the different options, I recommend you take a look at that tool. I did want to talk a little bit more about data sovereignty because it is a hot topic these days. There's a lot of court cases as well as legislature coming out in different countries that is addressing this space. And the reason why this has gotten so complicated is because when you're talking about moving data to the cloud, you are talking about it's something that's necessary. We're essentially creating copies of your data and moving them between different environments. You're moving from a local environment to a cloud. You potentially are moving them once you're within the cloud to another location, so you have some geo-redundancy built into the cloud. And that's necessary to kind of maximize control. But it really, if you are concerned about where your data is located, particularly if you're an international company, you really need to look for solutions that will tell you exactly where your data may go. Because where your data is located, it's going to be subject to the laws in which that company is located. So even if your data travels through that country, potentially, even if it's not being stored in that country, even if it transfers, it still may actually have some legal implications for it. This is a very complex and emerging legal space. We could probably do, and we have done some other webinars actually that go very deep into this. But it's something just to bear in mind as you're looking at cloud solutions. For the most part, if you're talking with vendors that actually have data centers in your region, in the country that you want your data, you should be able to get a guarantee from them that it's going to stay where you expect it to be. But it is something to watch out because in some cases, some of the cloud vendors will move your data around. It may pass geography lines. The other thing I wanted to talk about was kind of WAN transfer rates, because this is a consideration that can be quite restricting depending how much capability and how fat your pipe actually is to your cloud. Because if you need to move, this chart is basically showing the time it takes to move 2 terabytes given the bandwidth of a typical connection. So even if you have a fairly high-speed connection, like whether it's a fast Ethernet type connection or an OC3, it can still take multiple days to move that amount of data between your local environment and the cloud. So if you're like many of our vendors, many of our customers who have tens of terabytes, may have 20 terabytes, 30, 50 terabytes of data, these numbers can really start adding up. And this is a particularly concern when you want to get your data back. It's one thing to basically say, oh, it's going to take me a couple days to get my data into the cloud. I can wait. You probably can't wait if you actually have a disaster and you need to get your data back out of the cloud. So in this particular case, we do think it's important to look at cloud seeding and understand how your vendor does cloud seeding as well. both for seeding into the cloud as well as reverse seeding to get your data back out. So how can Unitrends help with this? We talked a little bit about some of the products. I wanted to kind of put up this slide that actually shows you the full portfolio. In our case, we generally recommend people go with a hybrid cloud solution where you have local backup stored on-premise as well as backup copies put into the cloud. So for the local on-premise, we have our Unitrends Recovery Series physical appliances as well as our UEB, our Unitrends Enterprise Backup software solution. UEB installs as a virtual appliance in your VMware or Hyper-V or Citrix Zen Server environment, or you can install it as installable software in Linux. Recovery Series is a hardware solution where we provide everything. We provide the hardware, the storage, the software, everything all in one solution. Both are basically cloud-empowered data protection and recovery solutions. Both protect virtual and physical systems and do everything that you need to protect your environment. Both solutions can be augmented with the Unitrends Forever Cloud and Unitrends DRAS and Reliable DR Recovery Assurance. Boomerang is something, as I talked about earlier, that can be applied on top of these appliances or can stand alone on its own. So that's kind of the Unitrends portfolio. Just going to touch briefly again on the Unitrends Cloud. Our cloud is available in 5 countries around the globe. So we have data centers in the US, UK, Australia, Germany, and Canada. And we currently have over 10 petabytes of data protected in that cloud today. Our most popular option today is that Forever Cloud option. What people like about it is it does give you that infinite cloud retention, but it's also very granular. You can dial in the exact amount of data that you want to protect. So your environment may actually have 20 terabytes of data, but you only want to move 1.5 terabytes of it into the cloud. You can do that and dial it down and get your cost down to the exact level that you want for what you want to pay for cloud storage. It's very easy to automate so that unlike using tapes and having to manually put tapes, you can automate this so that your backup copies are going to an external location very easily. Our DRAS offer, I just want to highlight a couple things from this as well. Our DRAS offer works in conjunction with our Forever Cloud or No Limits Cloud solution, and we do guarantee that your VMs that are protected in the Unitrends DRAS offer will be available within 1 hour of you declaring a disaster. So we take this very serious. We have our data center staffed with recovery experts round the clock. So if you have a disaster you need to declare, you simply make one phone call to us. In less than 1 hour, you'll have your environment back up and running. And this doesn't require you to build your own secondary site or put any of the extra expense into it. It's a very cost-effective way of getting DR. The last thing I wanted to touch on before we turn this over to questions and answers is to talk about our Reliable DR product. Because this is something that I think is a technology that's not widely known in the industry. It's something that Gartner has been talking about in their recent hype cycles, and we actually think it's something that can greatly assist IT to have more confidence in their environment and be able to go home at night knowing full well that their backups are working properly, their DR environment's working properly. So what recovery assurance allows you to do is have absolute certainty in your ability to recover. So you can deploy this either in your local environment or your DR environment or in the Unitrends cloud, and it automates the testing of your applications. in that environment. So we are able to essentially look at your backups, validate that your backup is working properly. We basically test at the application level. So if you have an N-tier application that has a lot of dependencies in it, we will test all those dependencies. So it's not simply just booting up the VM and validating that the VM started. We actually test the application and validate that all the interconnections are working and this is working exactly as expected. This is also something that allows you to, in a sandbox, experiment around with making sure that your backups are okay. There's been some recent issues with VMware with their change block tracking API, where they've essentially created a situation where it looks like your backup from VMware worked properly, but all the change blocks that were in those virtual disks weren't necessarily tagged. So you could have inconsistent backups. If you actually had reliable DR and recovery assurance deployed, you would have seen that right away that, boy, something's wrong with this backup. I need to make sure that maybe I have to kind of go and do a full backup instead of relying on the incremental. The key to this is we deliver this recovery proof in the form of a report that shows on a per application basis that your recovery point actual and recovery time actual is meeting what your objectives that you set. So what we're seeing here is we had 4 applications that had an RPO requirement of 1 day and an RTO requirement of 30 minutes. We've actually validated that they're all well within that. Most of them are operating within 10 to 20 minutes of an RPO and within 5 minutes of an RTO. If any of these were to fall out of compliance, you'd be able to see it and be able to do something about it before you actually had to rely on your DR or your backup environment. And you can absolutely have complete confidence that things are going to work properly. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to basically turn this over to Katie in just a second to see if there's any questions. I'm just going to point out a couple things that you can go and utilize right now. We have a business continuity and DR tool that is free. It's at bcdrlink.com. This is a free planning tool that actually walks you through best practices for BC and DR. Allows you to basically build your plan, store it within the tool so that you can actually have it accessible even if you have a disaster and you're not able to get to your facility. It's a really great free solution that allows you to basically get your plan built. We also on our website have free trials available for our enterprise product as well as our free product called Unitrends Free. And we're very confident that our solutions are really able to help people solve their continuity problems and keep their businesses and ideas running. And as a result of that, we're running a current campaign where if you're willing to basically have a chat with us about your continuity problems and what we could potentially do, we'll give you $15 for having that 15-minute conversation. So you can actually go to unitrends.com and sign up for that as well. So with that, I'm going to ask Katie if there's any questions that came in while I was talking.
There are quite a few questions, so we're going to run through those really quickly. If you are looking for how to ask us a question, just look for the icon with the question mark, and please make sure to address all of your questions to all of our panelists. So our first question that's coming in today is, how do you back up the long-term archival cloud? Do you recommend converting the cloud data to archival digitized microfilm for long-term storage, i.e. permanent?
Not sure I got all that.
He's essentially saying, do you need to take an archive of the data that's in the cloud for long-time / permanent storage?
So no, this is kind of the beauty of Forever Cloud is we will we'll store your data forever. So what you're doing is you're essentially, as you're backing up your production data, we're sending archives or replicated data into the Unitrends cloud. So we've started to talk about that as being backup copies, as opposed to talking about archiving, but it's really kind of the same thing. And once it's actually in the Unitrends cloud, we'll keep it, for as long as you require us to. So if the question is, I have a bunch of tapes that are out there, and how do I best go about doing that? That's probably a different question, and that's probably a more of a services discussion that we could possibly have about how we go about doing that.
All right. And then another question: what kind of bandwidth would be required to restore servers that are 1 terabyte?
It's a question that really depends on a bunch of factors. It depends on the amount of data to, if you're talking about what it's going to take to actually back up your data, that's going to depend on how much your data is changing and how much it compresses. But if the question is, if I've got 1 terabyte and need to pull it back, it's that, I would say you'd probably want to get as kind of thick a pipe as you possibly can get. We do have some recommendations in some of our knowledge base articles for how much data, what the pipe is that we would recommend. I'd have to look up exactly what it would be for that particular size. But again, this is where our data shipment SLA can kick in as well. If you actually have terabytes of data and you need to get it back, we actually don't require you to pull it all back over the internet. If you have a small amount of data, if you just want to pull, an individual file or a smaller set of data, that can go over the internet. But if you have terabytes, we'll actually put it on to a new appliance or onto physical media and ship that to you as well. So if you flag that question, I'll get him a specific answer actually on the bandwidth.
I will. And then another question is, in the event of a disaster that takes down physical lines, will wireless communications be enough to restore?
Wow,
We got some doozies today.
Yeah, I mean, can you restore? Yes. It's a question of how long it's going to take you to restore. And, I have seen situations where businesses have actually, in the case of, major hurricanes and things like that take down wide area, where they have been able to kind of get their critical applications up and running in a DRAS environment, and then use the time while they were actually running in DRAS to actually get their data back some other way. But if you're simply trying to do things over mobile, it's probably going to be a pretty slow connection. It's probably going to take a while. So it's probably not something we would recommend. Could it be done? Probably. I think there's probably alternative ways of doing that. It's one of the reasons why we think DRAS is such a great solution. If you combine cloud backup with DRAS, you really protect yourself from a wide variety of downtime contingencies. So if you have a situation like that, you can be back up and running in the Unitrends cloud using our compute, using our storage, using our network. You could run like that for up to 30 days. After 30 days, there's an additional charge, but you can run like that for some period of time while you rebuild your local environment or whatever. But if you're trying to again just get your environment back up and running and your internet connections are down, you know, that's another case where the kind of data shipment SLAs can help, where we'd send physical media in that particular case.
All right, and then another question is, will cloud storage technology stand the test of time? Digital data is classified as medium term, which means 10 years or less. How can you ensure that data stored in the cloud long term will stand the test of time, such as 20, 50, 100 years or more of retention?
Well, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see the technology shift. Matter of fact, we already have, where if you look at some of the cold storage options and everything, they're probably on slower speed disks and things like that. Some of the higher cost cloud storage are on additional media, and you can even go up to things that are running on flash drives. I expect the same thing that's been happening for 20, 30, 40 years in computing is going to happen with cloud as well. That same technology curve is going to happen. We're going to have new drive technologies. We're going to have things move around. The beauty of what we're essentially doing with cloud backup is we're essentially moving copies of backups around. Matter of fact, Unitrends actually, in our cloud, we actually have geo-redundancy built into our cloud so that we store your data not just in one location, but we actually store it in another location so that if that one facility actually has a problem, you don't lose your data. And I think what's going to happen is over time, as technology changes and we need to kind of keep things retained, your data will be moved, from slower speed disks to faster disks to whatever, the new technology that comes up. I think it's just the nature of cloud probably makes that easier than it would have been in the past. In the past, we were storing things on tape systems, and then we changed tape systems, and your old tapes no longer work with your new tape system, and cloud kind of removes a lot of that. You're essentially, dealing with digital data that is highly mobile and compartmentalized, because in many cases they're essentially VM snapshots and things of that nature. We also see a change coming down the line in some of the cloud backup and continuity technologies where we think containers are going to be very important as well. So I expect, as the world moves from virtualized VMware environments to containers such as Docker or LXC or whatever containers, that will also have an impact on kind of how we store and move data around. But I do think cloud is probably better suited for doing that than the traditional systems that we've had in place for the past several decades. Long-winded answer, I know.
All right. So another question, what is the frequency that backups can occur, and what is the suggested connection speed for backups as well as disaster recovery?
So you can set up on a per VM basis how frequently you want your backups to occur. You can do it, every couple hours. You can do it as frequently as every few minutes. The bandwidth is going to be dependent on your data and what your data actually, what the change rate of your data is. So you can have 1 terabyte of data that changes very infrequently, and as a result of that, you don't need very much bandwidth to actually do the incremental updates. Or you can have 1 terabyte that has a change rate of 20%, 30% a day. In that case, you're going to have a pretty thick implementation. The other thing that you want to look at when you look at these solutions is what sort of kind of WAN acceleration and other type of compression technologies are built into the backup tools. Unitrends has a lot of capability in there for compression, deduplication, WAN acceleration, some other things that we do to optimize and minimize the amount of data we have to send over the network. But that's something that as you work with our cloud ops teams, they would help work with you to make sure that you had things set up properly and your DRAS environment got set up properly and tested, and everything was working per your specifications. But it is, unfortunately, not something that we can kind of give you a single answer for. It's kind of dependent on your environment and your data.
All right. Another question is, do you have any hospital clients looking, or excuse me, do you have any hospital clients backing up their EMR?
We actually do. Matter of fact, DRAS in particular, not just backup, but DRAS as well. We have a number of hospitals that are using it for exactly that. We are willing and able to sign a BAA agreement to make sure that you're able to maintain HIPAA compliance going into the Unitrends cloud. Yeah, it's actually probably one healthcare and hospitals and medical providers are probably one of that. Government and a few other verticals are very, very popular in these cloud environments.
All right, and then can you recover single files from a virtual machine without an agent level backup?
Without an agent, we support both file level as well as kind of VM level backup. We do require to basically get down to granular level recovery. Generally speaking, that does require us to basically put an agent in most cases in that environment. That's kind of the interesting thing about Unitrends solution is we support both agent and agentless backup. So you can do kind of VMware snapshots, or VM snapshots across the majority of your workloads, so you don't have to deal with a lot of agents. But then in those particular cases where you need either greater insight or more granular recovery, or you want to get down into something that's specific to a particular application, you want to be able to go into Exchange or SQL Server or something like that and do a specific object level recovery. In that case, we do use an agent to do that.
All right, and then how much data can we recover via the WAN versus requiring a shipped media recovery?
It's probably, I don't know if we actually give a specific answer to that. I think if you're over a couple terabytes at that point, you're probably better off using the data shipment than doing it over the internet. It's really going to be what's the fastest way to basically get your recovery point, your recovery time back. And if you have a pretty thick thick WAN connection, you can do a couple terabytes pretty easily. If you have a very narrow pipe, it's probably going to take a while to do it, and you're probably better off requesting the data shipment. So again, it probably depends on your connection speed. And we do see connection speeds very widely. People and businesses that are in rural areas, struggle to actually get very fat pipes, and then you talk with some customers that are, in metropolitan areas and have higher budgets and they have almost unlimited bandwidth, it seems.
Right, and then this may be our final question, unless we have any other questions hanging out in the queue or anybody who was waiting to ask us a question. Is the connection to and from your servers encrypted?
Yes, we encrypt both in flight and at rest. So what we actually do is we encrypt your data as you're going in, and when you actually want to access your data in the cloud, essentially we use an open VPN connection that's encrypted as well. But yeah, we encrypt your data with 256-bit encryption when it's in flight.
All right, well, we want to thank everybody for their time and interest in Unitrends and all of the great discussions that we had today about the cloud. We do look forward to following up with each and every one of you here over the next few days.